Welcome back to the Small Business Show, where you get to hear the journey, find the challenge, and create solutions. I'm your host, Lori Brooks, and I thank you so much for joining me today. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. This week, I have the pleasure of chatting with Tom Schwab, visionary entrepreneur, Navy veteran, and the founder of Interview Valet. With a background in the medical device industry, Tom transitioned from a structured military career to become a leader in the podcasting world. As an introvert, he recognized early on the potential of podcasting to connect businesses with their ideal customers in an authentic and impactful way. Through his company Interview Valet, Tom has helped hundreds of entrepreneurs, authors, and thought leaders amplify their voices and grow their brands. Tom, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Lori, I am thrilled to be here.
I am thrilled to have you. I am excited to dive into your journey as an entrepreneur. But before we do, I actually want to rewind the clock just a bit. I want to go back to days before the Navy, before any thoughts of entrepreneurship. What did you tell, say, an aunt or an uncle, or even your parents or a mentor, when they asked you, Tom, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was your
I want to
answer to that question?
I want to be an architect. I grew up
Love it.
in the western suburbs of Chicago, 38 miles west, and my dad used to take me into the city, and I would just stand there looking up at the buildings and thinking, someone built this, someone that may not even be alive anymore, but I'm looking at this. And I just stand there in awe. And then my dad would nudge me. He grew up in the city and he'd like, stop looking up. You look like a tourist. But I wanted to be an architect and build things.
I love that. And I love that perspective. That's so funny because I actually grew up here in the city of Boston. So I never even thought about how people who are not in the city and don't grow up in the city might really truly be fascinated by the architecture and how that might inspire someone. That's a very interesting perspective. I thank you so much for sharing that. So you were looking at buildings, you were inspired by the enormity and the ability that someone else had to actually create something. So that obviously sparks something in you. So share with us how it is you went from, let's think about architect to Navy to your journey. How did this journey evolve, Tom?
And I love the word evolve, right? Because it wasn't planned. It's not what I had in mind, but life evolves and it's beautiful how it does it. So I got into the Naval Academy on a clerical error. I mean, literally, a clerical error. I have no depth perception. They didn't catch it until my senior year. And so I went into the Navy and ran nuclear power plants in the Navy. And that was sort of the idea of that, hey, I'll just be a naval officer. Well, whenever anybody asks or thanks me for my service, I say, thank you for paying for my education. Thank the families because it was so, the deployments were so hard on the family. I was married, had two kids, and just realized my marriage wasn't going to last another deployment. So I got
Mm.
out of the service and went from one quote unquote safe job to another. Right. I worked
Mhm.
for corporate America, a Fortune 100 medical device company, started in operations and engineering, kept getting promoted, but I hated it. It just was like, I felt like I was on a submarine. And so I wanted to get out and sell. And I remember my dad told me that I was a fool when I got out of the Navy. And then he called me a dang fool, or words to that effect, when I went and took a straight commission job. But I knew I could make it work. And I loved the challenge of it. I loved the newness of it. I ended up being the distributor and running the state for them. And I thought, well, this is sort of entrepreneurship, but I still had one employer, right? There was one manufacturer. So
Mhm.
sold that business back to them, started a direct to consumer e-commerce rental business. And that's where I fell in love with Boston and going up there to see the people in HubSpot. I was their first e-commerce case study and then sold that business off and Then as I was in I call it my sabbatical phase. I went and was in a mastermind, and people said, "How'd you grow your business?" And I said, "Well, we did it with guest blogs, but those don't work anymore.
Mhm.
And I think podcast interviews will work now to tap into other people's audience." And so we started to test that about 2014, launched the company in 2016. And for the first couple of years, people would say, "What's a podcast?" Really took off about 2019, and there's been no looking back since. We've got a team of 22, all remote. And from day one, we've been remote. And we work with high level coaches, consultants, professional services, nonfiction authors, and really people that are trying to get their message and their viewpoint out there.
I absolutely love it. Tom, you have beaten me to it on so many aspects of this interview, but I think it's hilarious. You wrapped it up so perfectly for us, and I so appreciate you bringing us through that evolution. You truly did start off in the Navy, as you were mentioning, and I thank you for your service, and in advance, you're welcome. You're too funny. And like I said, you would beat me to it. So my father is actually a retired National Guard. So I was waiting for you to share a bit about the Navy before I had a chance to thank you for your service. But you beat me to every bit of that. And I thought that was hilarious. And I didn't want to interrupt you. I just thought that was great. So, and I thought it was funny that, there are moments in life, as I mentioned, it's an evolution, as you agreed. It's an evolution. And as you went into the Navy and you started serving your country, the last thing you thought was that deployments would play a part in your choice to walk away from the Navy. But I totally understand that. Life is life. And marriage is a series of compromises. 100%. This show is a compromise, Tom. My husband doesn't want to listen to me talk business all the time. I got to do something to entertain myself over here. So I thought that was great that, I commend you for taking that time to recognize that maybe the Navy wasn't the right position for you, that there was something else that you needed to do with your journey. And, despite the fact that most parents are telling their children to find that job, that traditional position that they can retire from, I thought that was such a dichotomy in your story where your father, I mean, and it's funny because he's looking at the Navy and telling you don't leave the Navy. So I get that aspect of it, but it was also funny because he was telling you that you were silly for doing so, but you were still looking for a traditional position for that security. So I just thought that was such a funny piece of your story. And I thank you for sharing that aspect. I'm curious as to what it was for you, mindset wise, at that point in your journey that really did propel you, give you the support, the belief in yourself, and the trust to take on the position, move forward with the traditional positions, and then actually start looking at, growing a business and moving through the journey at that point. What was that mindset transition like for you?
I think as you grow up, all that you know is normal, right? Whatever you're exposed to is normal, and that's how the world is. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll always be thankful to the Navy for showing me the world, right? Before I joined, I had probably never been more than 100 miles from home. Everybody pretty much thought and looked and acted like me. And that was my whole world was like that. And then to get around the world and see what people were doing in other parts of the world, and how they looked at things. And once your world gets big, it's hard for it to get small again. And so that's when I said, when I went and worked in corporate America, I felt like I was in a submarine, right? If I didn't, it felt like after a year and a half of being at this job, if you didn't live within 100 yards of me or
Mm-hmm.
work in the same building, or our kids didn't go to school together, or you didn't go to the same church service as I did, that was my world. And I'm like, it's too small. I don't want to do that. So that's one of the things where I loved. I had gone out with some of the sales reps, and it's like, wow, they get this autonomy. Now they work hard, but they got to see so much more. And I think it was just this idea of, I want more. And I think there was something about maybe a youthful thing where I didn't know, right? My dad was trying to warn me that of all the things that could go wrong, right? And I think as we look back at entrepreneurs, if we would have known all of the problems, we wouldn't have started it. But there's something about that youthful exuberance and to being, if you want to call it young and dumb in a new business, it's like, I can make this go. And I think that's what changes the world and starts
Mhm.
companies.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And it reminds me of a quote I heard on another podcast, and I was struggling to try to think of which podcast it was, but the quote was, "You can only aspire to that which you're exposed." And it's
Ah,
true. You can only aspire to that which you have the exposure to. And you were fortunate enough to have the exposure to recognize your aspirations were far beyond what was going on right there, right then and now. So that aspiration and that desire propelled you obviously to start building out companies, which was the first case study for HubSpot, as you mentioned, which is a company that we're quite familiar with over here. I absolutely adore HubSpot. Of course, I'm here in Boston, so kind of hard not to know about HubSpot over here. So, no, that's excellent. And you recognize through the course of the mastermind that, you know what, okay, this is how I got this business going. But there's always a pivot. There's always a shift in the markets. There's always a change in business. And you had the foresight to realize podcasting was going to go somewhere. It was going to do more than just, be this media source in the background. It was going to become a powerhouse for business. What was it that gave you that insight? What was it that made you recognize that?
I think you give me too much credit for that. I think most entrepreneurs, when they start, if they're honest with themselves, they'll look at it and say, this is going to be epic. And it's either going to be epically stupid or epically successful, one of the two. And you don't know. And most people die not knowing, right, what it would be. So it's one of those
Yeah.
things where I had a hunch and I had the curiosity to play that out. And because I've had other hunches and tried other things. And one of the things I think is when I've got the hunch, I'll move forward with it, but I always want to keep listening to what the market says because
Mhm.
I've always got my opinion. I can hire coaches and consultants. They'll give me their opinion, but it's the market always tells me what they love and what they loathe. So even when we started Interview Valet, I had this great plan. We're going to do this and this and this. And people would tell me, yeah, I don't really value that. Here's an example. When it first started out, I wrote a cheesy PDF that I gave to people. And
Mhm.
then somebody said, well, you should have a course. Okay.
Mhm.
So I did a course, Lori, and I never took it out of beta, right? Every
Mm.
2 weeks, I would revise it with questions and feedback
Mhm.
people had, and I'd
Mhm.
raise the price, but everybody got 50% off, right? And I remember somebody told me that was very honest. He said, listen, I don't want to learn how to do this. I want to be the guest. You take care of all the rest. And
Mm.
I saw people, you can see with courses on the back end, there'd be so
Mhm.
many people that I'd give free consulting with it. And I'd be like, Lori, how's the class going? Oh, great. I've gotten through it all. I understand it all. I'm just waiting for the right time to start it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can see the back end. You've gotten through chapter 1, right?
Right.
Ask me for your money back. I'll give you your money back. I want to help people, not just take their money.
Right.
So I
Right.
had this vision of what it would be. And then
Mhm.
clients told me, no, this is what you need to do. And so from that standpoint, like the name Interview Valet, I did not
Mhm.
come up with that. That was one of our early beta testers that thought the name would be great. He found it was available. He bought it and gave it to me. So it's like I could come up with some great story on how I've got this perfect 3 to 5 year business plan, but we're all making it up as we go.
There you go. And I thank you so much for that, Tom, because that is the clarity that the audience truly needs when it comes to this journey. It's a journey, it's an evolution. You make it up as you go. You figure it out. As one problem arises, you come up with the solution or ask someone you know who's had experience and can show you what the solution is
Yes.
instead of racking your brain to figure it out. Because there's plenty of us out here. Tom, that is such great clarity. And it's so true because we have no idea what the next step is truly going to be. We can map it out all we want. We can create the strategic plans and we can follow them as best we can. But there's always going to be some ebb and flow to every single plan. There's always going to be a pivot somewhere that you're not expecting. So, throughout the pivots, what do you feel like has really helped you, Tom?
Somebody early on told me behind every problem, there are profits.
Mm,
And most people, when they hit the problem, they stop. And
mm,
that's why the person that can figure out that problem gets the profits from it. So I've sort of played that game. It's like the bigger the problem, the more of a challenge it is. It's like, okay, there will be profits after this. Everybody else is going to
mhm.
stop. I'm going to keep going on this.
Yeah.
And the idea that once I figure this out, then everything will be perfect, I think hurts a lot of people, right? Once I
Mhm,
have this much money,
mhm.
I won't have a problem in the world. Or once my business, once I get to hire my first employee, I won't have any problems in the world. Or
Right.
once I've got an executive team, I won't have any problems in the world. No, the only time you don't have problems in the world is when you die. And I'm not looking
Mhm.
forward to that. So I try to
No.
look at them not as problems, but as challenges. And,
Mhm.
like that idea of, oh, this is a big problem, a big challenge. So there must be profits on the other side.
100%. And like the show, hear the journey, find the challenge, and create solutions. 100%. I
Yeah.
agree with you. Great minds think alike. You have to hear the journey. You have to figure out what those challenges are, not necessarily problems. And, as I'm sure the audience is so tired of hearing me say the following phrase, Tom, there's no such thing as failure. There's only
Wow.
feedback. You could keep going, keep going, keep going. You can trip as many times as you want, but if you get up, you figure out where it was you tripped, why it is you tripped. Maybe it was a shoelace, maybe it was the sidewalk was raised, whatever it is, you've learned something from that moment and you can keep moving forward with whatever the baby steps are. So
I,
thank you for that.
I
So
remember,
mhm,
I remember when I was in direct sales, straight commission sales, my best account after about 18 months,
mhm.
he was talking to my manager and he said, I wasn't sure if Tom was the most persistent sales rep or the stupidest sales rep. And my boss is like, well, what do you mean? He said, I never bought anything from him, but he just kept coming back with a
Mhm.
new idea, a new question. And he said, after about a year, I felt sorry for him and I threw him a bone. And he's like, it's almost like throwing bread at the pigeons to get him to go away. And he said, once he got that bone, he never left. And,
Mm.
18 months into it, I probably had over $1 million of business through that
Mhm.
gentleman. And, so many other people got discouraged with it. And I'm like, okay, well, I learned this. He's not
Mhm.
interested in this. I learned
Mhm.
this and just kept working at it. And so
Yeah.
still at times where it's like, I don't know if I'm the most persistent or the stupidest, but I'm not going to give up.
I would say the most persistent because persistence pays. So,
Yeah.
as we can see, Interview Valet has become a success. And I'd love for you to share with us what you're doing with it today and what your thoughts are for the future. Now, we know it's an evolution. We know no journey is perfectly mapped out, but what do you see as the next steps for Interview Valet?
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a lot of problems in the world, but there's no better time to be alive. And I
Mhm.
am more excited about the business today than when I started it, 9 or 10 years ago. Um, I think people want connection.
Mhm.
They want authenticity And when I say people, I'll even say that's what the search engines are looking for, right? I think we're going to this world where we want to impact the people that hear us, but
Mm-hmm.
also these large language models, they're listening to content too. And
Mm-hmm.
we've seen over the summer here where our clients are telling us, and we're seeing it too, that, oh, we're getting leads from ChatGPT. When I put questions in about marketing and using podcasts as marketing,
Mm-hmm.
they're referring us. And so we're
Right.
excited about doing that. And I call myself the chief evangelist officer, right? I've got friends that are CEOs and, they have to deal with SEC and investors and everything. No, that's not what
Right.
I do. I evangelize for our company, for our category, for our team. And I
Mm-hmm.
love this time because I think we're going to a point where podcasts are even more impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And by the grace of God, we have built this amazing team, right? We've got 22 people on our team. About 2/3 of them are military spouses, and they are doing such great things, right? And I feel like I'm freed up to do other things, and that we've got this foundation of the right people in the right seats for what's coming here.
I absolutely love that. And I've had the pleasure of personally working with the Interview Valet through the years. And I really do adore the team. I love what you've created. I love what you're doing. So we've sprung forward. I'd love to know, we're going to rewind the clock again. If you had the ability to go in a time machine, say 20, 30 years back, long before you started Interview Valet and started this journey, and tell yourself just one thing, what do you think that would have been?
Focus on relationships.
Mm, that's a good one.
Yeah,
It's a very
it's
good one.
it's um, a dear friend of mine that passed away way too young. He got
Mm,
real wise about a year before, and he told me something that I'll never forget. He said, "Relationships are the ultimate currency." He's like, if you got a check, nobody's going to take it if they don't know you. If you want to do a deal, nobody's going to do the deal with you if they don't know you. And
mhm,
he said that, and then about a year later, he passed away. And the
mhm,
relationships that he has were so impactful. He had all these friends looking out for his family. His family would never want for anything. And, with insurance money, well, inflation can take that away. Taxes can take it away. But those relationships that he had, those are the ultimate currency. And I've even seen that in business, right? If you got a problem, if you've got a relationship and a community and people
mhm.
to reach out to help you solve the problem, right? If you got a relationship, you can get the funding. If you don't have the relationship, good luck.
Definitely. You have to build a community. You have to surround yourself with the right people to continue on this journey and move forward properly. So thank you for that, Tom. If you had the ability to, say, wave a magic wand and change anything at all in the podcasting industry, what do you feel like you would go ahead and change?
I don't know if I'd say more transparency or less transparency, right?
Mm,
Because I think people get focused on metrics that just don't matter,
mm,
right? So there's this thing where everybody says, I get 1 million downloads and, I'm a top 1% podcast. It's like, no, we all can't be one top 1%, right? So I think if there was more transparency, it's like we could be honest with where we are. But then the flip
mhm,
side too, does it matter,
mhm.
right? Does
Exactly.
does my ranking in the world matter, right? I'm in the top million people in the US. That's stupid. It means nothing. I want to be number one for my wife. I want to be well, I'd say I don't want to be number one for my kids. They should have other people there, especially as they're grown up here. But I want to be in the top 10. So this like global ranking and stuff like that, I think is
Yes.
becomes like an ego metric and is
Mhm,
meaningless. It's like figure
mhm,
out who you want to be number one for and just focus on
mhm.
that.
I love that. Who do you want to be number one for? And focus. Tom,
Yeah.
you are outstanding. I have so enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed having you as a guest. Please share the best way for the viewers to find you.
Yes. I was going to say, if you want to come back to our website there at Interview Valet, we put together a page, and everything we talked about, it'll be on there. And just go to Interview Valet with a v.com/ Lori Brooks, right? That's easy to remember. Our mutual
Super
friend there.
easy.
And on there is a assessment, 10 questions. Will podcast interview marketing work for you? Free copy of my book. You can buy Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy. You can buy that on Amazon, but if you go there, you can get a free copy. And then finally, if you want to connect with me, I'll put all my social media, my calendar link, all of that will be back there at interviewvalet.com/ Lori Brooks.
Tom, you are outstanding. So I have to thank you from the top for your service. Thank you for your time. Thank you for such an amazing interview. Thank you for your team. Thank you for all that you're doing. I am super excited that we've connected. I am excited to continue this relationship with Interview Valet. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.